everyone, and thank you very much for joining us for this final edition of Succession Management and Institution Building here on Amogate Radio Communication. My name is Tolu Omadaya. It's been a joy, it's been a delight, it's been a pleasure. We have been very grateful for the privilege of your presence from the beginning of this quarter all the way till today, Tuesday, March 26th, which is the very last Tuesday of the first quarter of 2024. How have you been? How have yours been? How have you and yours been? Right? We hope that you've had an interesting and illuminating, and inspiring and an instructive journey with us thus far. Today, we are going to do a quick recap of some of the things we shared last week, and we're going to launch into the deep and, of course, draw the curtain. So, last week, we were looking at rewards and consequence management as an institutional pillar for stimulating and sustaining innovation. I'll repeat, rewards and consequence management as an institutional pillar for stimulating and sustaining innovation. And where did this come from? This came from the need to put to bed the sort of unfounded myth, right? It's believed, it's largely believed, but it's not necessarily accurate, right? So, but it can be said to be pervasive. So we felt the need to address that perception that institutions tend to threaten innovation. And we've been saying in the last couple of episodes that no, not necessarily. Institutions can actually be used to stimulate rather than inhibit innovation. Institutions connote a set of rules, procedures, processes. We've talked a lot about this. It's not just about the brick and mortar. As a matter of fact, it's not largely about the brick and mortar, right? It's more about set ways of doing things, right? We can define institutions as a set of rules, a set of processes, a set of procedures that guide how things are done, right? And rather than having the set of rules frustrate innovation, the set of rules can actually be delegated or deployed to intentionally, motivate innovation, right? To be the motivation for innovation rather than the frustration of innovation. It's all about how it is deployed. And that's why leadership is very critical. And that's why succession management is also very crucial, because it's one thing for you to understand as a leader that you can use institutions to set the innovation ball rolling. It's another thing for you to ensure that you raise successors who have this mindset, right? So we're looking at performance management specifically as one of the institutional pillars which can be used to stimulate innovation, right? And we talked about the more or less like the cycle of performance management, which we use in Amogate, and which a number of organizations I can imagine also use, which begins, of course, with performance goal setting, from performance goal setting to performance monitoring, from performance monitoring to performance evaluation. And we emphasized last week the rewards and consequence management as some kind of a sub frame within the performance management framework, because rewards and consequence management can be some kind of a concept and a framework on its own, but it's also a closing of an effective performance management framework, right? So when you talk about performance management, of course, it has to begin with goal setting. Sometimes some organizations or some cultures think about it from the perspective of performance measurement alone. However, that's sort of late in the day, if you want to put it that way, or late in the game, quote unquote. You want to ensure to begin with that performance goals are clearly set, and that's when you begin to lay the expectation for innovation. Because if you don't set it, you can't expect it. I'll say that again. If you don't set it, you can't expect it. If you don't set it as a performance goal at the beginning of a performance period, then you cannot, request it. You cannot even train for it. You cannot strategically monitor and motivate your team in the direction of the set goals. So it begins a lot with the performance goals, and the performance goals itself or themselves should derive from the overall strategic goals of the organization. Extremely important, right? And so when you have the performance goal set, you must also monitor. We emphasized it a lot in the last 2 weeks. It's extremely important to ensure effective performance monitoring. You must do it as a leader, and you must also raise your successors to do so. It must become the culture of the organization. A performance evaluation is not seen as some kind of a vindictive process or some kind of a punitive process. I think that's the better word. That may be the better word. A punitive process, and in an extreme, even a vindictive process. I hope not, but some organizations unfortunately have such a call. So ideally, performance monitoring is that process by which you ensure that you are giving constant feedback, right? We talked about two forms of performance monitoring about 2 weeks ago. I think that was the episode of March 12. We talked about continuous and periodic performance monitoring, right? As a team or at the level of the team, you should be meeting at least once a month. And with the level of individuals, at the level of individuals, in other words, in terms of your direct report on a one-on-one basis, you should be meeting at least once a week to monitor the goals. Where are you on this? What are the challenges you're having on this? Do you need support? What kind of feedback do you want to give, or do you want to communicate? In fact, do you even need us to reevaluate the goal set, right? Extremely important. So by the time you eventually have the periodic performance monitor evaluation, right? Not just the periodic performance monitoring, but the actual performance evaluation, where you're sort of assigning a grade just to sort of give quantifiable feedback, right? Where you're assigning some sort of a grade to the actual performance at the end of the period, you would have given an indication of where your employee or team is or are. If it's completely a surprise to them, then honestly, something has gone wrong with your leadership, and that's not the kind of thing you want to pass on to your successors, right? So if you've done the performance goal setting effectively, you've carried on performance monitoring well, you've continued to a fairly, so to say, carried out performance evaluation, right? Very, very important. It was a very fair process, right? Then you can now go on to the rewards and consequence management, which you use to implement what you want to see in the culture, right? Very, very important. One of the things we talked about last week is the fact that leaders must not, lack the courage. They must not lack the courage to differentiate performance to rewards and consequences. Extremely important, right? We mentioned the fact that in some organizations, we have seen reluctance of leadership to differentiate performance. Oh, how would they feel? That's not your job. It's not part of your job description as a leader to be fearful of how your employees feel, right? I remember saying last week, this is why we've kept emphasizing that leadership is not for everyone. Leaders must have the courage to differentiate reward. Of course, remember, we've also spoken about fairness, extremely important. Communication, transparency, very, very important. This is the goals. In fact, also giving them room for feedback, even allowing your employees to request for an evaluation or a re-evaluation of a goal set. Having done all that, if the employee still fails in meeting up with the standards he or she should have, delivered, having done all as leaders, having done all as an organization, then it is extremely important for you to differentiate performance through rewards, because that is the way you build and cement culture. Extremely important. So you as a leader must not lack the courage to differentiate performance to rewards and consequences, right? And you must raise your successors to understand the critical role of rewards and consequence management in ensuring continuity of innovation and in strengthening continuously effective and excellent performance. I'm going to say that again. To begin with, you as a leader must not lack the courage to differentiate performance to rewards and consequences, because as we've been saying a lot on this program, and I think probably more intently in the last few episodes, you cannot perpetuate what you are not, what you did not initiate. I repeat, you cannot perpetuate what you did not initiate. Succession management is basically a process of perpetuating, but there must be an initiating before there's a perpetuating. It's because you have built something, right, that you can now ask for a continuity. Or maybe you have carried forward what somebody else built, you're now transferring it. We've talked about organizations that are 150 years old, 120 years old, or 250 years old. We've given several examples. Even the tech companies are already 40 years old, just like that. The likes of Microsoft are about 30 years old. Microsoft, by the way, overtook Apple a few days ago, I think in the last 24 hours or thereabout, because Apple was recently sued, I think yesterday or so, by the US government, and that cost Microsoft to overtake Apple as, I think, the most capitalized company. Now, that's just by the way. I'm saying that to say that this is a very strong organization today, and it's already 40 years old. And it's not strong only because it was started, it's also strong because it was sustained. Because as far as I know, Bill Gates has probably disconnected from the day-to-day leadership of Microsoft for the last 20 years, just like that, right? And even before his very eyes, in his lifetime, he's seen the organization rise from time to time. I mean, today they are probably the most capitalized organization in the world, or at least in the United States as of today, right? All because there was an intentional process of succession management, right? So you as a leader must not lack the courage to differentiate performance through rewards and consequences, because if you lack that courage, you are going to perpetuate the wrong kinds of behaviors, right? You will be perpetuating what you're initiating. It's just that what you're initiating is not the kind of behavior that should be perpetuated. So leadership is very, very important. Succession management is critical to institutions, right? And before we talk about succession management, it's important to ensure that the right kind of leadership is what we are succeeding. Very, very, very important, right? So leaders must raise their successors, having demonstrated it themselves. Like we said, leaders must then raise successors to understand the role of rewards and consequence management in ensuring continuity of innovation and in strengthening continuously effective and excellence performance. Taking of the word continuity, continuously effective, that's the whole point of succession management. You want to remain relevant for today and also responsive to tomorrow. I'll say that again. You want to remain relevant for today and as well responsive to tomorrow, anticipating of tomorrow, as a matter of fact. At a point, you do not even just want to respond to tomorrow alone, right? Organizations of the future anticipate and create the future. What about that? The reason why you have Microsoft today, the reason why you have all these organizations, being ahead is because they actually do not just wait and anticipate the future, they go ahead to create the future. And it's not enough for you as a leader to think this way. You must also ensure that you're selecting, training, raising, and pipelining successors who can continually think same. It must become the culture of the organization. Now, as we round off this program, you want to close on the note of culture. Culture itself, I don't know if you know, is like an institution. We said this last week. Another word for culture, another word for institutions we said last week might as well be intentionality. On the other hand, another word for institution might as well be culture. Cultures are institutions because cultures are, a set way of doing things. When you say an institution is constituted of norms and rules, and ways of doing things, to be honest with you, that's exactly what culture is. You know that if you're listening to me, whatever is making you listen to me, you're already operating at a level where you understand that culture is about those set norms and those set rules and those set processes, that way of doing things. So we want to close on the note of, raising your successors to understand the role of culture in cementing institutions. I'll say that again. Raising your successor to understand the role of culture in cementing institutions. Last week we hinted at this. We said one of the critical responsibilities of leaders is to shape culture, because leaders are one of the major things you do. Sometimes, and I'm really going to the heart of the matter in a way I probably haven't done since the beginning of this program. Sometimes we think that leadership is about doing and doing. No, it's not necessarily about doing, it's about getting things done. It's about ensuring that people do things. It's not about you. In fact, I have a problem with you being the one doing things all the time. Then we don't have leadership. And I know that may be hard to take, but just process it. The whole point of successors is to have others doing exactly what you're doing at a level of effectiveness that at least matches yours and at a point should exceed it if you have done a very good job. So one of the ways by which you ensure that things get done is culture. If someone once said, and I don't know whether it was me that said it, I can't remember, But culture is one thing I like to define as the default way of doing things. When you open your computer, your laptop, and then it defaults to a particular screen without anyone having to do anything, that is the culture. That's comparable to the culture of an organization. What do people default to? And this is very important because you see, at the end of the day, people do not really consult policies and processes all the time. When the rubber really hits the road, they default to the culture. So you want to make sure that as much as possible, the rules, the processes that have been written down also become the culture. You want to ensure that there is no disconnect between the written rules and the lived culture. And this is what you must do as a leader, and you must also ensure that your successors understand how to do. So it's about raising successors to understand how to shape culture as a key institutional tool. Very, very, very important. Raising successors to understand how to shape culture as a key institutional tool. Now, how do you do this? It's not very difficult from some of the things we've been saying, right? It begins with you yourself doing it, you yourself recognizing it, you yourself modeling it, understanding how to shape culture. Last week we talked about rewards. Today we have gone over it again. Rewards and consequences are one of the critical tools through which you shape culture. Whatever you reward would get repeated. I'll say that again. Whatever you reward will get repeated. And you have to also understand what exactly does reward constitute. We hinted at this last week and we're going to repeat it, because if reward is this important, then you don't want to go away from this conversation with a poor understanding of rewards. It's not necessarily always financial. It can be material, it can be financial, it can be non-financial. Especially when it comes to differentiating performance, you must recognize what constitutes reward to each person or each team. If you're an international organization, for instance, what may be reward in a particular geographical culture, in a particular region, may be very different from how another region perceives it, right? If you're a national organization with widespread state representation, you also want to know how the different regions within that nation perceive reward, right? Even if you are a one-office organization, you also want to understand how different teams and perhaps the unique personalities you are dealing with perceive reward. So you want to make sure that you are not in an illusion of culture shaping, right? Because if you think you are given a particular kind of reward, but it's not what they interpret as reward, you may actually be, instead of shaping the culture in the right way, you may be living the culture in a neutral state. In other words, it's either getting better or getting worse. And if you're not careful, you may actually be reversing the intended effects, right? Instead of shaping the culture in the right direction, you may be taking it in another direction. You may be communicating the exact opposite of the message you intend to by misapplying rewards and not understanding what constitutes rewards. So it's really important that as a leader, you recognize what is it that this region, this organization, this geographical area within a nation, and so on and so forth. How do these different contexts interpret reward? What constitutes reward to them? And the moment you understand it, you can then pass the same knowledge on to your successors. Now, sometimes this would require conducting audits. Sometimes it would necessitate you having studies done. Sometimes it can be a very simple survey. Sometimes you can ask them to anonymously fill this survey if they feel comfortable doing it anonymously, and if they feel comfortable sharing it in a way that they can be identified, then let them do so. What is important is that you must know what exactly translates into reward in that context before you misapply reward and think you're shaping culture and you're only living it neutral, or if you're not careful, misshaping it. Very, very important, right? Remember, today we're talking about raising successors to understand how to shape reward, how to, ensure that, they cement the institution, especially the institutional practices that they want to see, right? entrenched and they want to see perpetuated, that they use instruments like reward to shape the culture in this direction. The number one responsibility of a leader is to shape culture. And if you do that as a leader, you must also raise your successors to understand that their number one responsibility is to shape culture, because culture is what the people will default to, is what your teams will default to, is what your organization will default to, is what your employees will default to, even in the absence of rules, right? Sometimes even in the presence of rules, if they have their way, right? But if it has become the culture, if it's not just a written rule, but also the organizational culture, then you are in a much safer place. Culture is an institution itself, right? It's a fabric of the institution. Very, very, very important. How exactly do I raise my successors to shape culture? And first of all, I need to transfer that understanding. That's the beginning. They must understand that they need to shape culture. Then, having comprehended the criticality of shaping culture, I will also ensure they have the tools with which to shape culture, right? And we've looked at one of it, that is rewards and consequences, rewarding what you want to see perpetuated in your culture, and of course, applying consequences to the kind of behaviors that you want to ensure do not get cemented into the cultural fabric of your organization. This is still Tolu Madara on Amoge Communications. We'll be looking at succession management and institution building. We've been on this journey from the beginning of the quarter, which is also the beginning of the year. And today we are coming to the very last episode. And we think it's important to close on this note of culture, right? How to shape culture, how to, ensure that we cement institutions through culture, because culture itself is an institutional fabric on its own. Culture itself can be described as institution. Well, as a dry curtain on this episode, we also want to, on this episode and on this program, we also want to talk about some of the other things that might be ways of reinforcing what the culture of the organization not just believes in, but also celebrates. Sometimes you will go into organization and you will see that certain messages are reinforced, right? I think it's important to also use communication to shape culture. Very, very important. Communication is another tool, another important and critical tool. When I say communication, I'm talking about things like what you hang on the walls. For instance, even your screensavers, when you have meetings or you have town hall meetings, of course. And this is where I also want to emphasize the importance of a two-way communication. Very, very important. Communication, as a matter of fact, is said not to be complete until there is feedback, right? So it's also important to ensure that you open up the channels, allow your employees to give feedback, right? When you have those communications. The paintings on the wall, the messages on the screensavers, that can be some form of a one-way communication. You're passing information. But when you have town hall meetings, when you're discussing your values, when you're discussing your principles, sometimes even your reward sessions, and we're back to rewards. If you're giving somebody an award, if you're celebrating someone for outstanding performance, it's not just enough to, last week you mentioned this and we're repeating it. It's not just enough to highlight the performance of the individual. It's also important to link it to the institutional value that individual has modeled, because what you're basically saying is that this individual codifies, embodies the institutional values that we espouse and we want to entrench in our culture. So that's another powerful tool, right? Yes, there are rewards and consequences, but communication is also very, very, very important, right? And in this day and age, there are so many ways you can do that. You can do that as sometimes you can have digital videos, short 30-second videos, 1-minute videos, again reinforcing that message, right? In very interesting and so to say admirable ways that they can connect with. Again, as a leader, it's not necessary for you to do this yourself. It's just important for you to get this done, right? Extremely important. But communication is another vital and very viable means of, shaping culture. In fact, to be honest with you, if we say that one of your primary responsibilities as a leader is to shape culture, I dare say another of your critical responsibilities as a leader is to communicate. We said last week that we've said this on previous mortgage communication programs, especially the ones on leadership, that the reason we have eyes in the head is as a leader, as a head, you must have vision. But guess what? Another reason we have the mouth in the head is also because as a head, as a leader, you must communicate. Extremely important. I've never seen a leader who is not effective in communication. It's not negotiable. You must communicate effectively. You must communicate continuously. You must communicate creatively. In other words, it's not just about talking. I've said it and I'll say it again. Communication is two-way. And you can't even conclude that you have communicated effectively until you have the appropriate feedback. So it's really important to make sure that you communicate, and communication is one of the ways through which you can shape culture. And I'm talking about constant, consistent, effective communication that is not complete without the feedback from those you're communicating with. Those who are the intended recipients of the message you're passing across. And remember, in this context, it's about the message of the culture, right? Now, I need to say something here as some kind of a balance. I will begin to wrap up for the sake of time. I need to say that what you do is one of the most powerful forms of communication. And that's why we started with rewards and consequences as a way of shaping culture. I once saw a saying somewhere. The saying goes thus: who you are is shouting so loudly in my ears that I cannot hear what you're saying. I repeat, who you are is shouting so loudly in my ears that I cannot hear what you're saying. In other words, what we do is a form of communication itself. And that's why leaders must model the right behaviors. You don't want to be behaving in a way that is in direct conflict with the message you are supposedly communicating by your words. And that's why we would always place what we model, what we reward, what we celebrate above what we say. However, it's important to say that having done that, in other words, having tried to model the behaviors you want to see become the culture of the organization, right? Remember, culture is the shadow of the leader. We've said that before on this program, I'll repeat it. Having also reinforced it through rewards and consequences, the culture you want to see, you also should follow up by talking about it, right? By communicating it, not just with behaviors now, having first behaved appropriately though, but having done that, you can now follow up with other forms of communication like the ones we have alluded to. And you must raise your successors to do this. You must raise your successors to understand how they communicate, the culture they want to see entrenched, the culture they want to see solidified, and the culture they want to see institutionalized in the organization. And these cultures, of course, must include innovation, amongst other things. Innovation itself must become a culture. Thinking strategically must become a culture. Behaving in a long-term manner must become a culture. Teamwork and collaboration must become a culture. Applying a cost-benefit analysis thinking must become a culture. There's a lot you can do with culture. Certain things can be solved at the level of culture, and as a matter of fact, even prevented because of the kind of culture that you have deliberately initiated and raised your successors to also ensure is or are perpetuated. Well, at this point, I think we have to draw a curtain. We're going to miss having you. We're going to miss doing this every Tuesday. We're going to continue a new program very soon at the beginning of the next quarter, which is just a couple of weeks away. Until then, we want to tremendously appreciate you for being with us on this journey of succession management and institution building. Week after week, this is the 11th episode of the quarter, and this is the final episode of the quarter. We're very grateful to you for joining us, for learning with us. And you are the reason why we do this. We've said it again and again, and we want to have you back with us once we start again in April, which is just next week. We want to have you with us again and would be sharing the new program that will be commencing. Until then, we want to really appreciate you for being with us on this journey, and we look forward to hosting you on the next program. For now, enjoy the rest of your quarter. Take time to reflect. Take time to look over your performance goals. If you don't have the right processes, we're happy to work with you as Amogate. If you have the right preferences, please take time to ensure effective performance evaluation. This is the end of the quarter, is a good time. Take time to even review where you are with your annual goals as an organization. It's also a good time to do that. And if necessary, update. And please feel free to reach us at any time. These are things we are very happy to do with you. You can find us on Facebook, you can find us on LinkedIn, you can find us on Instagram. Our name is Amogate. And you can also send us a message on +234 810 999 6666. +234 810 999 6666. Thank you so much again. We are very grateful to have had you with us, and we're excitedly looking forward to continuing with you next quarter on a new program, but no less exciting journey. Thank you.